When it came to making a sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog, there were two teams working on separate games. A team in the US making a sequel for the Sega Genesis hardware, and another in Japan making a game for the upcoming Sega CD. The US game ended up becoming Sonic 2, the game that introduced Tails and really streamlined the formula, and the team in Japan came up with Sonic CD, a game that focused much more on being a showcase for the Sega CD. Sonic 2 ended up releasing first, but Sonic CD wasn't far behind. The fact these games were developed at the same time left the games in weird spots. As time would tell, Sonic 2 became the stronger foundation for the series, with Sonic 3 following that title much closer in structure. But this would even extend into the series' future with the advanced titles and even Sonic Mania. In a weird way, Sonic CD was sort of lost to time. It wasn't featured in many collections up until Sonic Gems collection, but even beyond that, it was this sort of strange element in Sonic series that was only seemingly referenced through the new characters it introduced being in games like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Heroes. For a long time, I knew of Sonic CD's existence, but due to how elusive it was for a bit, I didn't grow up with it like I did the other classic games. I genuinely thought I was missing out on this massive part of the Sonic series. I'd played Sonic 1 to 3 and Knuckles, the majority of the 8-bit games, and of course the modern titles at the time. So when it finally came to playing Sonic CD, I was ready for something huge. At the time, I wasn't a Sonic 1 fan, but Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 were awesome. If this was a game that was supposed to be powered up with the Sega CD, this must have been a massive thing. I was ready to dive into a forgotten gem in Sonic's classic entries, but in the end, I was pretty disappointed. By no means did I dislike the game, but I really didn't get into it. It just felt weird. I wouldn't play the game again until Sonic Origins came out. This was the collection that put the games in order for a bit of story, so I would eventually give it a shot here. I started to come around to Sonic 1 around this time, but it wasn't the same for Sonic CD. I was still feeling that the game was just okay. We'll sort of jump ahead a bit here, so this doesn't sound like the same story as my Sonic 1 review. I do enjoy this game quite a bit more now, but it has elements I really just don't like. All stuff I'll get into, but as much as I don't like parts of CD, there are elements I really, truly appreciate. As I mentioned, Sonic CD was made to push the Sega CD. The Sega CD gave Sonic CD advantages over Sonic 2. Being on a disc primarily allowed for more storage. This boosted things in the audio department and allowed for more complex graphical enhancements. The sound effects sound pretty Sega Genesis-esque still, but there's definitely some new stuff in Sonic CD.
I'm out of here!
Those crunchy sounds were indeed words being spoken by none other than Sonic. Sonic will say these whenever the player sits idle for too long. After not moving for about 3 minutes, Sonic just jumps off the screen and gives the player a whole game over. Kind of a wild punishment, but with more modern versions of the game there are save files, or in Sonic Origins' case, that won't even happen unless in classic mode. The other sound effects don't really strike as anything too wild, but with the devs trying to make this feel like Sonic 1, they obviously are going to recycle a lot of those classic sound effects like rings or even the jump sound effect. Sure, they sound a little different, but they're going to replicate at least the core sound. You'll mostly notice the audio differences between Sonic's Genesis titles and CD with the music, but I'm saving that topic for later. The graphical enhancements come mostly from the cutscenes and this loop. Yeah, not a lot there. The animations were done by Toei Animation, or rather they produced it and contracted Studio Junio to do the actual animation. These guys worked on Batman the Animated Series, Trigun, alongside Madhouse, and they also did in-between animations for Dragon Ball. The actual quality of the cutscenes is a bit compressed. Later releases show how awesome these actually look, but for a while there wasn't much to marvel at. Still on surface value, the Sega CD wasn't doing a whole lot for this game. The larger memory space held some purposes beyond improving the audio and visuals. It allowed for multiple versions of stages to exist, and it essentially builds the premise of Sonic CD as a whole. Sonic is able to go to the future or the past of different zones to see how the world has been affected by Robotnik. In the past, things are more peaceful without too much machinery invading the nature of the zones. The present, where Sonic starts each zone, you can see where Robotnik is in his process of taking over. Then lastly there's the future, of which there are 2 versions. Without doing much, going to the future will show a grim and depressing state. The zones are covered in pollution and darkness as Robotnik is taken over. However, if the player destroys some things while in the past, the future will turn good and rid the zone of Robotnik and his badniks. So there are essentially 4 versions of each zone. While the actual layout won't change too much, there are parts that get altered and rearranged along with the entire stage getting a whole new look. The music even changes, but again, I'll talk about that later. To actually time travel, Sonic must pass a post saying either past or future, while maintaining a high speed. Stop too many times and you'll lose this ability to time travel, so it's best to find a good spot to build up speed and keep that momentum. Luckily, Sonic has this new ability in his arsenal, this being the Super Peel Out. Peel Out lets Sonic build up speed in place, letting him launch himself forward at high speeds, eliminating the need to go back and build up speed. Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, this is just a spin dash standing upright. Well, given the nature of how the games were developed by different teams, obviously they had different ideas. The spin dash is also in Sonic CD, but it's slower than the peel out and has a lot less flair to the Sonic 2 version, so it's not as big of a deal as it otherwise would have been. Also, on that note of familiarity, if how the time travel is executed sounds familiar, it's likely the exact reason you're thinking of.
Great Scott!
That's right, Back to the Future inspired Sonic CD. Director Naoto Oshima has stated it was an influence on the mechanic. Pass signs are usually positioned rather close to an area where you can easily line something up and keep your speed. But in some cases, like Wacky Workbench, the placement is sort of like a puzzle, forcing you to carefully think about where you're going to go and how to keep your speed. It can kind of be fun in some scenarios to do so, but in a couple of acts it's more of a headache to set up. Then, on top of that, there's the fact that you have to find objects in the past and destroy them to get the good future. These objects are robot transporters and Metal Sonic holograms. There's one of each in each act. The transporters are the main goal. Destroying these are what give you the good future, whereas the holograms are a side thing to go find. In a similar sense, a lot of these are really simple to find, on higher routes or in slightly awkward to get to locations. But there are a few that are tucked away and getting to them can be really difficult. Getting to the past and destroying the transporters is optional, so it's not all that bad. Destroying all of the generators will give you the good ending, although much like Sonic 1, that doesn't change much in the grand scheme of things. There is one other way to get the good ending though, and that's a bit more up my alley. In a similar fashion to Sonic 1, collecting 50 rings and bringing them to the goal will cause a giant ring to appear that will warp Sonic to a special stage. These special stages are much less nauseating. In these, you can control Sonic in a 3D space, with the goal being to destroy the UFOs. You're limited with your time here, and stepping in water will drain that time even quicker, so it can be difficult to decipher the best way to take down some of these UFOs. Not to mention, some are pretty fast and hard to pin down. But if you beat the stage, you'll get one of 7 time stones. Get them all and Robotnik can't reset time, so you get the good ending. As their name implies, these stones can manipulate time, and they're the reason for all the weird time travel shenanigans. These stones affect the planet much like the Chaos Emeralds had an effect on South Island in Sonic 1. Little Planet disappears from time itself and only appears once a month in a year above Never Lake. When Sonic stumbles upon it at the beginning of Sonic CD, the planet is chained to the ground and encased in metal. The Robotnik has already taken reign over the planet. Little Planet doesn't seem to have any inhabitants other than the occasional animal or abundance and plant life, but there are buildings and old structures that indicate some sort of civilization was once here. We can even find a statue depicting some sort of angel in Wacky Workbench. It's a strange detail, but it's one of those things that CD does to make me think about it. The Sonic series does like to do its world building, even if it can contradict itself sometimes, but still, I believe Little Planet to be one of the more interesting elements of CD. That's really all there is for a narrative. Again, it's just a game about Sonic taking down Robotnik, although there are 2 more characters this time. Sonic is again the only playable character, and Robotnik is the main villain. They are the same characters as before, but both are given a little more depth. With Sonic, he's given the voice lines and even a love interest in the form of Amy, who makes her debut in CD. Sonic's dynamic with Amy is pretty interesting in the earlier games, especially here in CD. Sonic will obviously save Amy, but saving the girl really isn't the ultimate goal. Rather, he's just here to take down Robotnik and his new toys. This is a really interesting take on the character trope of the hero saving the girl. Sonic is here to do good. He doesn't want the girl. Sonic is also supposed to be a younger character, so that could be an explanation. But I still believe this is more of a cool guy attitude type of thing. As for Amy's character, though, she doesn't have much yet. She's pretty much just the love interest character for now. She's a pink hedgehog in a dress. Even her name roughly translates to beloved. She does get a little bit of extra characterization outside of this game. She's supposedly a character heavily into tarot. The cutscene for CD and Sonic Origins depicts her using cards that draw her to Never Lake, where she'll inevitably meet Sonic for the first time. In the game proper, Amy can be seen in a handful of stages. She'll chase Sonic while she's free, but will end up getting captured by Metal Sonic at the start of Collision Chaos Act 1. Speaking of Metal Sonic, this is Robotnik's latest and greatest. Metal Sonic is a robotic clone of Sonic, an equal and opposite of the Blue Blur. While Robotnik would create other robot mimics of Sonic, Metal is by far the most successful one. You can argue something like Mecha Sonic Mark II is stronger, but Metal more accurately matches Sonic in terms of speed and mobility. This guy's chest is a jet engine for crying out loud. Metal is designed to be the exact thing Sonic is trying to destroy. Sonic and Metal Sonic share a very similar color palette, minus the tan on Sonic being swapped for silvers, whites, and yellows on Metal. Metal's design is a lot more sharp as well, giving that angular robotic look even while in a small sprite. Robotnik is again the villain of the game, as he typically is in Sonic games, but you can really feel he stepped up his game. The whole bad future speaks volumes to this. This is a massive change from Sonic 1. Sure, there was Scrap Brain Zone, but this is a lot more covered ground this time around. Nothing has changed for Robotnik in terms of design, but just like Sonic, there's a lot of little stuff working to build the egg as something more than what he was depicted as in the first appearance. Not only that, but Metal is a really impressive inclusion to his army. Most of his badniks are throwaway lackeys, but Metal has a presence all throughout the game. This time around there are 7 full zones, and while there are 3 acts in each zone, the third act is usually very short, and is more of a build-up or an extra challenge before the boss fight, rather than it being a full-on third stage. The third act also won't have time posts, so going into the third act, you're usually forced into that zone's bad future. However, if you do destroy the robot generators in both Act 1 and 2, then the act will get its good future state instead. This has no effect on the boss and the stage. No matter what, the fight will stay the same, only the arena will look different. One thing to note about the zones is actually how the game refers to them. They actually call acts zones, so what would normally be something like Stardust Speedway Act 2 is actually Stardust Speedway Zone 2. I will continue to refer to things as how the rest of the series does for simplicity's sake, but for those who really know the game, just know I know that I'm technically referring to these incorrectly. The starting zone, Palm Tree Panic, has a very similar vibe to Green Hill. There's waterfalls, tropical trees, and a similar looking background. And even the present variant of the zone shares a similar color palette. There's a lot of loops and straightaways for the player to adapt with the time travel mechanics. The past has this more washed look to things, making the oranges a bit more dull in color, and the backgrounds have this purple hue to them. Not much different from the present, but it's enough to indicate the time has changed. Now going into the future, things are very different. Everything has a darker color, the plants are dying, metal beams fill the area, and the water looks polluted. It reeks of death and decay. Interestingly, the good future still has the robotic elements, but it looks like the plant life is doing a lot better than it was before. I think this is implying that the leftover machinery from Robotnik was used to assist the wildlife rather than kill it. The boss fight for the zone is rather simple, but can be cheesed if you run up behind it where the boss drops in. Collision Chaos is a weird one. It's here that Amy is kidnapped by Metal Sonic, and the game really forces you to witness this. There's a spike wall blocking the only way forward, so you have to wait for Metal to come barreling through before you can move on. The actual zone is essentially the pinball zone of Sonic CD. Lots of bumpers and flippers fill the act, giving the player a couple different ways to build up their speed for time traveling. This is one of those zones I have problems with. The colors in the present are a bit odd, with a lot of the ground being this bright pink. It could be a style choice depicting the sunlight from a sunset, but the ground matches the color of the sky regardless of what time period you're in. Yellow in the past, gray in the bad future, and blue in the good future. It makes it a bit messy in terms of design, and I struggle to comprehend what I'm looking at sometimes. Good future also makes me wonder if there's inhabitants here or not, as a large city is now found in the background of the stage. The boss for this zone is really just a pinball puzzle. Get to the top and smack the doctor a couple times and you're good. Tidal Tempest is a water zone for Sonic CD. This zone is a lot more straightforward compared to Labyrinth Zone. It still has some problems, but it's a fine set of acts. The real pain here in this zone is finding the robot transporters, and this log. I hate this log. These acts feel very similar to Labyrinth Zone in appearance as well. It's a place Robotnik really hasn't gotten to yet, but someone has been here to leave carvings and such, making this place feel like a sunken temple or something of the sort. The past is this more natural feeling, with more jagged and rocky edges. The bad future has a lot of destroyed elements, and the water turns a pinkish purple. Maybe this is the same water you can see in the bad future of Palm Tree Panic. The good future sees the area become reconstructed into a large facility. There's a lot of plants behind glass, so I can only assume the area has been completely reconstructed to act as a research facility or aquarium. At this point, I'm assuming the good future has the inhabitants come back, or maybe new inhabitants have used how secluded Little Planet is to make it this sort of paradise for wildlife. The boss in Tidal Tempest starts with a bit of a chase before going underwater. More similarities to Labyrinth Zone. Here, Robotnik will use air bubbles as a defense. Only a single hit is needed at this point to make a Robotnik flee. Port Squadron is probably my favorite of the zones. The different times all have pretty unique looks and feels to them, and the actual level layout is the most fun to either blitz through or explore. The present is full of conveyor belts, used as part of a mining operation, whereas the past is full of tunnels made of wood, while the quartz is still relatively untouched. There's even a large pool of water in the background, connecting this zone to Tidal Tempest pretty well. The bad feature has all of the quartz stripped from the mines, and industrial buildings fill the background. Most of the natural caves have been converted into metal tunnels and death traps. The good future sees large chunks of the caves turned into metal as well, but there are areas of quartz still left over, and a large city with lots of greenery fill the background. The boss here is a pretty lame one. Robotnik will try to force Sonic into a wall of spikes while he runs on a conveyor belt, all while dropping bombs from above. Wacky Workbench sucks. This is by far my least favorite zone in this game. It has an interesting gimmick where touching the main floor while it's lit up will send Sonic flying into the sky, but it's just annoying. A lot of the time it can be a leap of faith, hoping you're at the right angle to bypass a low-hanging wall. Otherwise you're sent all the way up to an area you'll likely have to cautiously climb down from. The design of this place in the present indicates that this is likely a Robotnik-built area, likely a storage structure for his machines. Going into the past reveals the structure is still here, implying this is one of the first places Robotnik went to on the planet. There are also some rocky formations in the background of the past. The statue I mentioned earlier can be found in this zone's past, so the group that was here before must be long gone. The Bad Future sees the place rust over and is likely abandoned. If Quartz Quadrant was stripped of all of its resources, maybe this place wouldn't have any use in the Bad Future. The Good Future is a bit strange. There's this circus or carnival-esque design to the zone now. With all the bouncing, maybe it's turned into some weird funhouse. The boss here is another dumb one. You use the bouncy floor to ride debris up to higher levels while avoiding spikes that fall from above. It's hard to know on a first playthrough that the last section can end in the player getting crushed if they aren't careful. Stardust Speedway's a fan favorite. I assume mostly due to the boss fight at the end, but it's an interesting one for sure. Lots of really fast movement and confusing pathways. There's so much going on, it becomes another one of those zones that it becomes really hard to comprehend at times. The present has a large city filling the backdrop, and the roads are all mechanical with what seems to be horns jutting out from some of the sides. Robotnik seems really focused on some of his efforts here to make some sort of robotic city. In the past, this must have been some sort of large city, as there's plenty of large buildings by a body of water, but everything is overgrown with massive plants overtaking everything. So again, the inhabitants must be long gone by now. Into the future, we can see how absolutely gloomy everything becomes. Lightning fills the sky and the air is polluted by a red fog. Seems a bit familiar. The city's massive sea of lights show just how far Robotnik's reach has spread. The Good Future sees the city grow into a bright place with lots of theme park elements. Now for the boss fight, that most are probably already familiar with. The fight is with metal, or rather, it's a race with metal. Metal will attack Sonic, but there isn't really anything you can do other than dodge. This quote-unquote fight isn't too hard, but it's really cool to see Metal in action, even if he is defeated by a door. Metallic Madness is the final zone in Sonic CD, and it really does seem similar to Scrap Brain. There's a ton of traps, and those spinning wheel things make a reappearance. The stage also has segments where you'll be shrunk down. These areas don't really change much about the gameplay, but even so, they're a fun little addition. Although there is one specific segment in Act 2 that is a bit confusing. Look-wise, it's very Robotnik. It's a dark machine-filled base. Judging by the past, Robotnik must have started to build this base shortly after his facility in Wacky Workbench, as there's still not a lot of this place finished. The Bad Future shows how careless Robotnik can get. Things are clearly falling apart quickly and most of the base is rusting over. The Good Future has the base repurposed into a bit of a wildlife preserve, I think. This one is probably the hardest to comprehend as to what it turns into. There's a massive amount of trees in the back, but in the lower parts of the stage, there's this massive metal wall with some plants in glass cases. The machinery must be helping the plants, but I'm not sure what's going on. The final boss is a bit underwhelming, but it's a step up from some of the previous boss fights. Robotnik is in a machine guarded by panels that he'll occasionally throw at Sonic. Admittedly, this is still the hardest boss, but it's not as bombastic as other final bosses would be. Overall, one of the best parts of these zones is how good of a narrative it can tell. It's some really good environmental storytelling in a rather simple way. It shows that machinery and tech can be used to create a good future for nature. But it also shows us if Robotnik were to take over, not only would he make things a metal hellscape, but he wouldn't be able to take care of it all. Once he has it all, he seemingly can't control it. He just lets it fall apart and crumble. How far into the future the signposts take you isn't really stated, but it must be a pretty great amount given how rusted over the bad futures tend to be. Not to mention how absolutely different the good futures can be. On the other hand, some of the past seemed like they couldn't have been too long ago given the progress Robotnik has already made. Little Planet really is a big mystery, that's for sure. The actual stage layouts are fine. Some of them can be a bit cluttered and messy to look at, but they all have ideas that work out well. But as I mentioned before, my biggest problem with Sonic CD is just how much they leaned into that exploration. It's cool that it's there, and it's worth to see the good futures, but man, some of these felt way too tedious to find. Not to mention how short some of the levels become as a result of this exploration focus. It leaves Sonic CD in this weird spot for me. My first couple playthroughs, I didn't actively hunt down the generators, so I wasn't impressed. When I finally did play through the whole game and get the generators, the whole process was too tedious for me to really care. It did get me to appreciate the visual designs a lot more, but even so, that wasn't quite enough for me. One thing I would like to note on the story of CD, again, there isn't a whole bunch to actually go through. But with the time travel stuff, there's some extra stuff we can gather. Some of the later games actually do something interesting with Little Planet, as this is where Metal is left behind. Metal still goes on to show up in a couple of other games, but episode Metal shows us how Metal got off of Little Planet. Robotnik rescues him from Stardust Speedway, but the level is depicting the bad future. What this could possibly mean is that the good ending actually isn't the canon ending. There is the possibility that they simply use the bad future as it's the most recognizable version of the stage, but it kind of implies that Robotnik was successful in a sort of way. Maybe he just didn't know what to do with the planet, so after he took it over, he just abandoned it and left it to rust away. This sort of thing they could absolutely retcon for a future game, but it's really interesting to think about. Overall, Sonic CD is a good game, but I don't really care for how the game sets up the exploration in a lot of ways. Can't say the game is bad by any means. I really enjoy the presentation, but the actual gameplay is just not what I like. The exploration in games like Sonic 3 and Mania feel a lot more integrated and streamlined, so I vastly prefer exploring those stages compared to the ones in CD. Now, I'm not normally one to push for a game to be remade. I like a lot of remakes, but sometimes it's best to leave a game as they are. Maybe letting them get a remaster for future consoles, and that did happen to Sonic CD eventually. I would really love to see Sonic CD either get a remake in 3D or a new 3D game that allows you to explore Little Planet and its time travel mechanics. I actually think that would be really cool for another Sonic Frontiers style game. If it has to be remade, so be it. But if the writers can give us another reason to go back to Little Planet so we can just have another game there, I really think some of those ideas could really flourish. It was 2011 when Sonic CD finally came out with the Christian Whitehead remaster that put the game in widescreen. The widescreen made things feel way more natural, especially while hunting down those generators. This is the version you've been seeing on screen for most of the time, but that wasn't the only thing this version of the game added. It also added different menus, Tails as a playable character, and a soundtrack selection. Something I still haven't mentioned, have I? First things first. While we're talking about the soundtrack, it's important to keep in mind that there are two different versions of the soundtrack. One for the US release of the game, and one for everywhere else. The soundtrack for Sonic CD was changed only 2 months before the release of the game in the US. This was likely a marketing thing done by Sega of America to appeal to more what they believed the American demographic would have liked more. I do think the US soundtrack is good for the most part. I actually think the Bad Future version of Stardust Speedway is a better version between it and its original counterpart. It really fits the tone of the zone, but it also acts as a really good boss fight theme against Metal. But, to be honest, the US soundtrack doesn't really top the original soundtrack anywhere else in my opinion. It is a preference thing for sure. However, the original score for the game is the reason I've held off on talking about it for so long. When you consider Sonic CD as a package, the gameplay, the visuals, the soundtrack, I genuinely believe the original soundtrack to Sonic CD is by far the best part of it. I've always been a nut for video game music, especially songs from the Sonic series. I'll preface that Sonic CD still isn't my favorite soundtrack from the series. This soundtrack is a really brilliant mix of tracks conveying all the different states of the world. There is a general theme for each of the zones, but a different track will play for each state the zone is in. For each zone, there are a total of 4 tracks, and the soundtrack takes a bit of a different direction with the music, going for an electronic or house style. The Present is usually a pretty Sonic-feeling tune. The song sets the tone and kind of gives you something to expect. This is where you can really hear the difference in the audio quality. There's a lot of sample usage here. Yes, that means you. As well as a heavy use of synth. The past tracks all sound retro in a way. Can't really put my finger on why, but I think it's because the audio samples are compressed to make it sound like they're on older hardware. You can really hear it in Collision Chaos's past track. The Bad Future tracks all sound more chaotic, conveying that sense of destruction and chaos. You'll hear a lot of sample mixing in these tracks. I mean, just look at Stardust Speedway. Lastly, the Good Future tracks all have that more cheerful and calm vibe to them. Most of them sound like they'd fit right in with the credits. A good and happy farewell to the hard work Sonic has done. I will say I'm no music wizard. I don't really know all these music terms, but some of these songs are really amazing. Like, did Quartz Quadrant Present really need to go this hard? Or what about Metallic Madness Bad Future with the voices and laughing? I can only assume it's supposed to be Metal Sonic and Robotnik.
You can't do anything, so go and be them try. Get some help. Don't do
As much as I like that US soundtrack, the tracks from the original release just fit so much better. There's also the opening themes. These I genuinely can't pick a favorite between. Both of them have that iconic Sonic cheese. Both versions also fit the opening really well, and act as a really good main theme for the overall game. My opinion on Sonic CD can essentially be summed up for me not really caring for the stages all that much, but the concept is really neat. Again, this isn't a bad title, but I just don't really care to replay it. I still think of it as an upgrade to Sonic 1, but the path Sonic 2 went on is the one I'm more glad they stuck with. There are zones I really like. I still really enjoy playing through Palm Tree Panic and Quartz Quadrant, but I have small gripes with all the other zones. Collision Chaos is a bit hard to navigate for a second level, Tidal Tempest is a slow water level, Wacky Workbench just sucks. Stardust Speedway can be really fun, but just like Collision Chaos, it can be hard to comprehend at times. And Metallic Madness has all the problems all the other Robotnik stages have in the Sonic series. For the most part, my complaints don't really run as deep as they seem, but it's still enough to where I don't want to replay the game. I'll gladly watch someone play it. It's fun to watch when someone who really doesn't understand the level layouts is in control. But for me, I'll just stick to jamming to the soundtrack for now.